Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly video helping you through your, in this case, Paper 1, Question 5, descriptive writing homework. The same structure really as the previous videos that I've released going through our descriptive writing structure, but also, of course, we're thinking about how to plan and organize those ideas before we launch into actually writing the thing. Now, in this video, I'm not going to provide you with sentence scaffolds for the simple reason that the scaffolding is there to support you to be successful early on as you become increasingly adept at writing your descriptions. But now that scaffolding needs to be faded away. So I'm still going to give you some ideas and some planning guidance and how to structure and organize those ideas. But I'm not going to give you sentence by sentence scaffolds today, only because you need to be generating those sorts of things yourself at this stage of where we are in relation to your actual exam. So, a few quick golden rules, reminders of golden rules. We're going to be writing in third person in our descriptions, not first person. That's going to liberate us, I think, in the sense that it will allow us to change location, shift across time if needed. If we want to introduce a flashback, it's easier to do that if we write in third person. We're going to be writing in complete sentences, paying very close and careful attention to our grammar. Now, there might be moments where we write fragment or minor sentences. I'm thinking particularly of, say, single word sentences, which are necessarily fragment or minor sentences. But that should be done sparingly, and crucially, that should be very, very intentional, not fragments where they're evidently unintended. And then the final point, past tense. We write in the past tense in our descriptions. Again, it's easier to manage, and if we write in the present tense throughout, it can become somewhat tiresome. And also, the past tense allows us to have that sense of capturing a kind of moment, almost perhaps as a memory. Right, next. Okay, butterfly, not grasshopper. So I'm just reusing this slide and image from previous videos. This actually comes from Miss Rowe and some of the work that Miss Rowe did on training around AQA and what AQA want us to be delivering as teachers and students in the exam and so on. We're talking about being a butterfly, not a grasshopper. So what that means, it's an analogy. What that means is staying with one moment, with one image, with one section of the island, for example, as we shall see with the stimulus image today, rather than, okay, so being like a butterfly, staying with that one detail, lingering on that one detail, rather than hopping like a grasshopper rapidly from one thing to another, which can almost start to feel like we're just listing. It makes our writing feel rushed, jumpy, unfocused. It's not very engaging, and we do end up descending into just sort of listing things that we can see, and that lacks the craft and the shape that we want in our writing. So, key message: don't hop, hover, and linger in one particular moment, one particular place, one particular detail, and extract kind of maximum descriptive value from that before we then move very purposefully and in a really planned, structured way to the next section of our description. So, generating ideas. Now, we've got this four-step process for generating ideas because we don't just go from looking at the image to then magically somehow a plan kind of exploding in our minds, right, that's done, then we can start writing. We have to look at the image, things have to go on in our minds, in our brains, okay, and then we can formulate a lot of different ideas, associations, and so on, that we then shape and craft into a structure and a plan. So we observe, what can we see in the image? Okay, and we'll go through this together in a moment. Then the crucial stage, associate. So what ideas, feelings, concepts do we associate and connect with and to the image? How are we going to sequence and order those ideas, concepts, events, moments for maximum clarity, but also maximum reader engagement? And then finally, what tone do we wish to adopt? So what kind of mood, emotional atmosphere do we want to adopt? And the overall sort of trajectory or course of our thinking then is from the literal, as in literally what can we see, to the conceptual, what ideas and associations do we connect with what we can literally see. Okay, so from the literal to the conceptual and the associative. Now, I'm going to demonstrate this to you. This is just how I interpret the picture. I'm also, in this section, you'll see the structure part. I'm going to give you a number of different options and just sort of talk through, perhaps in a bit more detail than I ordinarily would, my structuring and planning around my ideas. Because obviously I'm not giving you the sentence scaffolds this week. So I'll devote a little bit more time perhaps than I normally do to the structuring and organizing and sequencing of my ideas, and also where I've actually got some of my ideas from. Okay, so observe, what can we literally see? So we've got this wide shoreline, we've got some dark rocks, particularly in the foreground, and they're scattered along the sand. We can see gentle waves kind of rolling in. The sea itself looks rather calm. We've got what appears to me that it's probably sunset rather than sunrise. So that vivid sense of sun setting, look at the colours, orange, pinks, purples, and so on. Rather beautiful image in its own way. You can see the palm trees on the right-hand side kind of leaning slightly. And that sense of warmth, that warm light reflecting across the wet sand, particularly again in the foreground and in the water itself. Now, associate. So we're looking at this. So we're looking at this image of a tropical island at sunset. What ideas, concepts, and feelings do we associate with this image? And this is going to be distinct and individual to each of us because we'll be bringing our own experiences and ideas and knowledge, which will vary across, person to person, student to student. We'll be bringing that to bear. And so our associations are going to be different. These are just my associations. It's not really a case of right or wrong as such. It's just we're going to have different sets of associations. So we're moving beyond, as it says there, what we can see to what we can feel or what we would associate with the image. So I'm thinking warmth, I'm thinking stillness, and maybe a sense of temporary calm. Lurking in my mind is the idea of a sort of tropical storm. That sense of isolation. There's not really any sign of kind of human existence. There's no buildings, there's certainly no people in the image. So it feels rather isolated. I'm thinking about an isolated tropical island now. And that sense of detachment from human society and isolation geographically more generally, despite all of the evident beauty. So nature then, this is a rather beautiful image. I know that nature can be beautiful, it can be generous, provide us with food and so on, but also danger. I'm again thinking about tropical storms. It's also getting me to think a little bit about the way, for example, in Lord of the Flies, that the sea is presented or the ocean is presented. The idea of the shoreline as a boundary between the safety of the island being on land and then the sense of unknown and danger and maybe even fear of the sea kind of out there, the sense of the ocean or the sea being unknowable, this dangerous, vast, unconquered expanse. And then from that, I'm starting to think about ideas around survival. How would one find shelter and food and water in this sort of location? Now, I've not included this as a bullet point, and I'll be talking about this more once I actually go through my sequencing, but I'm also, in my mind, going to that part of my brain marked things I know about islands and what do I associate islands with. And some of that might be slightly surprising, and I'm going to sort of talk through where some of my ideas have come from. Okay, but before we go to the sequencing, we're going to skip ahead slightly, just quickly talk about the tone. So it might be cold, it might be detached, it might be restrained, perhaps. There might be that emphasis on nature's indifference and cruelty, and that tension rooted in survival and perhaps uncertainty. It might also give us, if we're rather than leaning into the kind of the warmth and coziness for reasons that will become clear, we might want actually, because bearing in mind that when the sun sets, it might actually be rather cold on the island, that sense of quiet, that sense of our human fragility. Now, that leads me rather neatly into this particular idea. Why this isn't just a beautiful island description. So the temptation will be, and I understand this, to just describe the island as attractive, to kind of go down the route of describing it almost like a tropical holiday, And if we do that, our writing is going to become extremely shallow, predictable, boring. As I've noted here, examiners, were this to be the actual image in the exam, examiners will be reading sunset, golden sunset after golden sunset, perfect beaches, the beach was perfect, the sand was golden, the waves were gently lapping against the beach or the shoreline. It's so boring, so cliched, so obvious. It's going to be really uninteresting for anyone who happens to read your description. So we want to make our descriptions interesting. And in the way we can do that, the way we can accomplish that is by looking beyond our first impressions. Our minds tend towards the comfortable, the obvious, and the easy. We sort of reach for, when we see the image, we kind of reach for the obvious straight away rather than spending maybe a moment or two to go, no, hang on a second, what else do I associate with this image? How can I look beyond first impressions? How can I introduce perhaps some tension or uncertainty? How can I explore what the setting might be hiding or indeed demanding? So, the beauty of the island, I think, should be a starting point, but something is going to need to undermine or challenge or disrupt that beauty, because if it's just paragraph after paragraph of what a beautiful island, this part of the island is beautiful, this bit is perfect, the sand is golden, the sea is calm, okay? Boring, incredibly boring. We don't want to do that. Strong descriptions, effective descriptions, time and time again, the examiners tell us, AQA tell us, that there needs to be some sense of threat or danger or contrast, a sense that there's meaning beneath the surface of things. And remember, the stimulus image there is a stimulus. The clue's in the word stimulus. It's there to be a springboard. What we don't want to do is just sort of rigidly stick to what we can see in the picture. We can move beyond. We should indeed always be moving beyond what can literally be seen in the picture itself. So, where can good ideas come from? Now, good ideas can come from anywhere. And what we can't be doing is just thinking, oh, well, I'm just going to rely on my imagination, because our imagination's like a muscle. It needs to be exercised. Okay. And the way we exercise our imagination, the way we feed our imagination is by reading, by watching things, by listening to things. So, for example, watching documentaries. Now, you can see that documentary there, A British Guide to the End of the World. I watched that quite a long time ago. I'm going to share a link on Google Classroom so that you can watch a little bit of the documentary that I'll be looking at shortly. Okay, watching documentaries. It exposes us to things that are unfamiliar, that are kind of beyond our ordinary day-to-day experiences. So when I talk through one of my ideas, that takes me beyond my experiences growing up in this country, living in Britain, and so on. It takes me way beyond that. Likewise, films and games, and I'm mentioning, for example, Avatar, the whole series of films, also has a video game associated with it or connected to it. They explore conflict, they explore things like destruction and power, and both of these sorts of sources, films, games, TV shows, documentaries, of course, novels, books, non-fiction texts, all of these sources help us move beyond the predictable. What we can do is we can borrow situations, we can borrow moments, events, and perspectives. We can transform those borrowed moments, events, perspectives. We can transform them into something really original. And then that's going to mean that we've got this really rich bank of ideas that we can draw from when we're in the exam. As it says there, the best writers, this is really, really important. The best writers are curious, attentive, and I would say absolutely voracious. They kind of just devour and consume stories wherever they encounter them, whether those are stories in films, novels, games, TV shows, or indeed in documentaries. So, first idea. Now, I'm going to share the link to the little bit of the documentary which has been kindly put on YouTube. You can't get it via the BBC website any longer. Essentially, when I saw the image of the island, it reminded me of a documentary in which, in the 1950s, British soldiers went to a Pacific island. They were flown there, and their job was to observe nuclear tests. Okay, and as you can see in the image in the back, that is one such nuclear test. So they were obviously miles and miles away. They were safe on the island, to a certain extent. Okay, they weren't going to be killed by the nuclear bomb being exploded, but they were there to sort of observe it and see the effect and sort of feel the effect and kind of study it. And I'll share the link to the documentary. You can watch it. It's about the first 21 minutes. And that gave me my idea, because it's this idea of a tropical island being this place of tranquility and beauty, which is my opening paragraph. The calm before, okay, the calm before the explosion of the bomb. So we've got this sense of tranquility. The men on the island, they're observing. The sea is still. We can go with the kind of typical sort of beautiful sort of tropical island description. But then the detonation of the nuclear bomb. And you've got to watch the documentary, watch the 20 minutes, and you'll see exactly what I mean, because it interviews people who were there. The young men, the young soldiers who were observing it are interviewed, and you can hear directly from them. I'm not going to try and ventriloquize their experiences. Watch the documentary, and they'll tell you in their own words. So the middle two paragraphs focus on that experience. To put it in brief, obviously the light is so powerful you can't look at it directly, so they have to turn away when it's about to sort of go off. They feel the force of it. It's a horrifying moment where essentially when the bomb goes off, it draws water, like vaporizes water, but also draws sea animals from the ocean up high into the air that then later, shortly afterwards, basically rain down on them. It's sort of like rains fish. It's almost, it's kind of biblical sort of pestilence. It feels like something from the book of Exodus, okay, in the Bible. They can also see, because of the radiation, it produces X-rays. That when they look at their hands, they can actually, it's like a sort of live X-ray. They can see the bones in their hands, okay, which is just uncanny and terrifying and strange. And then there's the aftermath, because there's a huge shock wave, and obviously it does knock down some of the buildings and causes damage. They get knocked to their, knocked over and so on. Watch the documentary. That will give you the raw material. There's like horrible moments, for example, where they look up and there's loads of seabirds, and because of the heat, the seabirds that were near the bomb going off basically set on fire, and they're like looking up. Again, it's horrifying. They can see these birds kind of like flailing around in the sky. They're on fire. So there's a sort of simultaneous sense of awe, as in like, wow, look at this bomb going off, what humans are capable of doing. At the same time, then horror and terror and fear. Oh my goodness, this weapon, we just dropped it, in the middle of the ocean on on an island many miles from us. Imagine if the bomb landed on where we are, and the sense of like horror at nuclear war, or the potential of nuclear war. Now, we said we don't want to do a boring tropical island sort of, isn't it nice and warm and golden sand and all of that? This is really, really far removed from that sort of description. So we're avoiding the obvious. We're avoiding cliche. There's nothing cliched about this whatsoever. The other alternative, and I mentioned Avatar. This is not my idea. This is really from Mr. Scott. It reminded me of Avatar. I'm not sure if that was where he got his idea from, but the idea of the unspoiled island, this kind of beautiful tropical island. Again, we want some sense of disruption. So the kind of invasion of people turning up and engaging in industrial activity, particularly something like mining and so on. Okay, like machines. So as I've said there for paragraph 3, like biting into the earth, maybe deforestation, drilling, smoke, pollution, all of those sorts of ideas, which you definitely get in Avatar. That's kind of like the central conflict of the films and also of the video game. That idea that you've got this kind of pure, pristine, beautiful, unspoiled location. In our case, it's an island being destroyed and damaged and polluted and spoiled and defiled by human industrial activity. That's a great idea. Again, we've got tranquility and beauty, but there's disruption. It's not just tranquility and beauty for all 4 sections of our description. So that, for me, would be another kind of interesting way into it. So just to summarize then, this will be our 4-paragraph plan, the nuclear test on a tropical island. As you can see there, I've kind of laid it out for you. Those are the sort of 4 stages of our description. You pause this if you want to use this particular example, or indeed, here is the same sort of idea, but obviously this is the plan structured around the industrial invasion, as I've said there, of an unspoiled island. We've not got the Na'vi, the kind of blue aliens running around, firing their, bows and arrows at machines and people invading their planet, Pandora. We're not doing that. We're just inspired by that sense of conflict and disruption. So we're not going to have blue aliens running around in our description. What we are going to have, though, is that sense of industrial mechanical disruption and pollution. As I've mentioned, that idea that something that was unspoiled and beautiful, the natural environment of the island being spoiled, destroyed, defiled by human activity. Okay. So that's the plan. You've got two plans there, two sequences that you can use. If you want to come up with your own and ignore both of those, you can do something better. Be my guest. There's lots of other options you could have chosen from, but that's just a suggestion of two possible approaches. And then finally, we've got the actual writing cycle. So this is the internal structure of each paragraph. Okay. Again, this is the same each time: inform, describe, reflect, react, connect. Obviously, the location has changed, and this will alter depending on what the paragraph focus is. I think the reflect and react would be interesting if we're thinking about, say, the nuclear test observation. That would be, definitely the reflect would be interesting there, about the kind of the horror and the terror and the violence and the kind of awe-inspiring power of nuclear destruction. Likewise, reflection on the beauty of nature, but also the way in which human activity all too often, rather sadly, certainly in the kind of modern industrial period of human history, all too often takes nature for granted and ultimately destroys it, okay, through human industrial activity. So those are your options. That's the writing cycle. I hope I've given you some interesting ideas there that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily have thought about, just because we want to move beyond the obvious. We want to avoid cliche. And that can be hard to do because our minds tend towards the comfortable, and we sort of reach for what's immediately obvious to us, which would be a kind of cliched, tropical, almost like holiday type location, golden beaches, all that. We don't want to do that. We want to do something a bit more interesting, sense of threat. It's ominous, or there's a sense of disruption, the contrast between spoiled and unspoiled locations and so on. It's going to be far more interesting. And therefore, it's going to give us far more marks in the exam, as well as being much more interesting to write and indeed to read. So, as always, really good luck with your homework. Hope it goes well, and I look forward to seeing what you manage to produce. See you in the next one.